The growl at the edge of town, the neighborhood of Oak Hill, didn't exist on any official city map. To the bureaucrats downtown, it was just a nameless grid of streets tucked between the rusting railroad tracks and the sprawling industrial park. But to the people who lived there, Oak Hill was a universe. It was the scent of Mrs. Evelyn Carter's award-winning roses, mingling with the smoky perfume of barbecue pits on a Saturday afternoon. It was the sound of kids' laughter echoing off worn pavement and the rhythmic, comforting clang of steel on steel that drifted from the open bay doors of Jones & Sons Auto Dot. For 40 years, that garage had been the neighborhood's beating heart, and Silas C. Jones was its steady pulse. At 68, his hands, though stained with the ghosts of a million oil changes, were as steady as a surgeon's. Today, they moved with practiced grace over the gleaming chrome of a 1965 Ford Falcon. His expression a mask of serene concentration. The world could rush and rage outside, but inside the sanctuary of his garage, there was only the logic of the machine. Across the garage, that logic took a different, more ferocious form. Dante Rec Williams, built like the muscle cars he adored, leaned into the engine bay of his 1970 Dodge Charger. The car was his masterpiece of controlled chaos, a behemoth of black steel and raw power. At 25, Dante was the neighborhood's unofficial big brother, his loyalty to Silas absolute, his protective instincts as potent as the scent of gasoline that clung to his clothes. He worked with a focused intensity, a low growl of rock music barely audible from a small speaker nearby. In the corner, bathed in the glow of a laptop screen, was Lena Whisper Evans. At 22, she was the final piece of the Jones and Sons family. While Dante spoke the language of torque and horsepower, Lena was fluent in diagnostics and data. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the intricate electronic nervous system of a modern sedan. Her own car, a dark green 1998 Honda Prelude, sat parked in the back. It was smaller and quieter than Dante's Charger, easily overlooked, but under its hood was a finely tuned engine, and inside, a custom-built suite of electronics that made it the smartest car in the county. The peaceful symphony of their work, the gentle clinking of Silas's wrench, the heavy thud of Dante's tools, the quiet tapping of Lena's keyboard, was shattered by a new sound. It started as a low rumble from the edge of town, a discordant growl that didn't belong. It grew louder, angrier, until it became a deafening roar that vibrated through the concrete floor of the garage. Silas paused, his wrench hovering over the Falcon's engine. Dante straightened up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, his eyes narrowing. Lena looked up from her screen, her brow furrowed. A procession of motorcycles thundered down the main street. They were the Iron Vultures, a biker gang whose reputation, like a foul odor, had preceded them. At their head rode Jed Razorthorn, a man whose arrogance was etched into the sneer on his face. He sat on his chrome-laden Harley like a king on a throne, his eyes scanning the neighborhood with undisguised contempt. To him, this place wasn't a community. It was territory waiting to be claimed, its people subjects to be intimidated. His gang fanned out behind him, their engines a cacophony of aggression, deliberately swerving towards the sidewalks to make residents jump back. They weren't just passing through. This was a statement, an invasion. The crew at Jones & Sons watched, in silence, Dante's hands clenched into fists. "What do these clowns want?" he muttered. Silas didn't answer. He just watched, his expression unreadable, his mind cataloging every detail. The number of bikes, their formation, the smug look on their leader's face. Then, the procession slowed, and their target became horrifyingly clear. They stopped in front of a small, immaculately kept house with a white picket fence, the home of Mrs. Evelyn Carter. At 82, she was the neighborhood's matriarch, the keeper of its history. Her garden was her pride, a riot of color that was the first thing to greet anyone entering Oak Hill. The bikers created a semicircle around her home, their engines idling in a predatory chorus. One of them, a lanky, eager-looking man named Brant Guttercobb, dismounted and swaggered to the fence. With a theatrical kick, he splintered one of the posts. Then, with a grimy boot, He began to systematically stomp on Mrs. Carter's prize-winning roses, grinding the delicate petals into the dirt. Another biker pulled out a can of spray paint and scrawled an ugly, jagged symbol, the Vultures insignia, on her once pristine fence. From the garage, Silas, Dante, and Lena saw it all. They saw Mrs. Carter's silhouette appear in her window, a small, frail shape against a monstrous display on her lawn. They saw the laughter of the bikers and the triumphant smirk on Razor Thorn's face before he revved his engine and led his gang away, leaving a trail of noise and fear in their wake. The familiar, comforting sounds of Oak Hill had been replaced by a ringing silence. The day, once bright with promise, had been irrevocably shattered, and in the heart of Jones and Sons Auto, a cold, quiet anger began to solidify into something hard and unyielding. The sound of silence the next morning. The air in Oak Hill felt heavy, thick with the fear that hadn't been there the day before. The trampled roses on Mrs. Carter's lawn were like an open wound on the face of the neighborhood. When Silas arrived at her door, he found her sweeping the broken pieces of her picket fence into a neat pile. Her movements slow but deliberate. She was a woman carved from resilience, but he could see the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes. "They can break my fence, see?" she said, her voice steady despite it all. "But they will not break me. We have to report this." Silas simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am, we do." The police station was a world away from Oak Hill. It was a place of sterile, white walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and an overwhelming sense of bureaucratic apathy. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. After waiting for nearly an hour, they were finally waved towards a desk occupied by a man who seemed to be physically melting into his chair. Officer Riley. Riley had a soft, doughy face and eyes that carried the profound boredom of a man counting down the seconds to his retirement. He listened to Mrs. Carter's account with a prodigious yawn, his fingers tapping lazily on his keyboard. "So," he began, his voice flat, "some fellas on motorcycles trampled your flowers. They vandalized my property." Mrs. Carter corrected him, her dignity unwavering. "They are a known gang, the Iron Vultures. They did it to intimidate our entire neighborhood." Riley leaned back, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what you have is a minor property dispute. You get some kids, some bikers. They get rowdy. It happens. This was not kids being rowdy," Silas interjected, his voice low and controlled, yet carrying an edge of steel. "This was a coordinated act of intimidation by a criminal organization." Officer Riley's eyes flicked to Silas, a flash of irritation in his gaze. "And you have proof of that? Did you get license plates? Did you see any faces you could identify in a lineup? Because without evidence, all I have is your word against, well, against nobody, since they're gone." He gestured vaguely. "Look, my advice, put up a bigger fence. Maybe be less provocative." "Provocative?" Mrs. Carter asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I was provocative by planting roses." "You know what I mean," Riley said dismissively, already turning his attention back to his computer screen. "There's nothing we can do. We don't have the manpower to investigate every trampled garden in this city." He printed a form and slid it across the desk. "File this with your insurance. That's the best I can do for you." The dismissal was total. It was a door slammed shut, a wall of indifference so absolute it was suffocating. They weren't being protected, they were being discarded. The walk back to Mrs. Carter's home was a long one. Silas's face was a granite mask, but inside, a cold fire was burning. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, who had made him promise on her deathbed to look after this place, to be its guardian. He was failing her. The system he had once believed in, the laws he had respected, had just told him and his neighbors that they were on their own. The hopelessness of it was a physical weight. When he returned to the garage, the mood was explosive. Dante was pacing like a caged animal, his fists clenching and unclenching. "That's it. See, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find those punks, and double quotes. And what, Dante?" Silas's voice cut through his rage. End up in a cell or in a ditch. That's what they want. So we do nothing, he shot back. We just let them run over us. No, a quiet voice said from the corner. Lena looked up from her laptop, her face pale but her eyes shining with fierce intelligence. We do something smart. She turned her screen towards them. It was filled with information on the Iron Vultures' arrest records, known associates, news articles detailing their history of extortion and violence. They're arrogant, she said. They're sloppy. They think they're untouchable because people like Officer Riley let them be. Silas looked from Dante's raw, unfocused fury to Lena's sharp, analytical anger. He saw two sides of the same coin, two halves of a solution. Won't watch out. He walked over to the main workbench, his voice stood there for a long moment. Newfound clarity, silence and purpose stretching out, silenced the room. The weight on his shoulders hadn't vanished, forging but it was changing the next day, transforming Jones from the burden of despair ceased into the mantle of responsibility. It became a war room. The change began when Silas cleared the main workbench, sweeping aside tools and greasy rags. In their place, he unrolled a massive yellowed piece of paper, a highly detailed topographical blueprint of the city's eastern sector, a relic from his 2 decades as a logistics and supply specialist in the military. It was a map crisscrossed with his own faded pencil marks from years ago, showing sewer access points, abandoned service tunnels, and every forgotten alley and dead-end street in Oak Hill. Dante and Lena watched, mesmerized. They had known Silas their whole lives as the quiet, wise man who could fix any engine. They were about to meet the strategist he had been all along. An engine is a system, Silas began, his finger tracing a narrow access road on the map. Every part has a function. A city is no different. These vultures, they think the main streets are the whole engine. They don't know about the wiring underneath. His expertise, hidden for so long, began to emerge not in stories, but in action. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a master of systems and tactics. He started giving orders, his voice calm, but imbued with an undeniable authority. Dante, he said, turning to the young man. Your charger, it's not just fast, it's heavy. It has presence. From now on, you think of it as a rolling roadblock, a psychological weapon. Its job is to control space. You're not the sword. You're the shield. We're going to reinforce the chassis and tune the engine for low-end torque, not top speed. You need to be able to move from 0 to 60 in the length of a city block and stop just as fast. Dante's anger began to channel into focus. For the first time, he saw his beloved car not as a toy, but as a tool, a shield. Lena, Silas continued, turning to her. Your prelude is the nervous system. It's fast, quiet, and nobody looks at it twice. That's its strength. He pointed to a list of electronic components he'd written down. We're going to build a mobile listening post, high-gain directional antennas, frequency scanners, encrypted comms. Your job is to know where they are before they do. Your eyes and ears. Lena's eyes lit up. This was a language she understood better than anyone. It was a complex puzzle, and she was born to solve it. Over the next few days, the garage was a hive of focused activity. Silas taught Dante defensive driving maneuvers, not on open roads, but in the tight, unforgiving confines of the industrial park's backlots. He had him practice J-turns and controlled slides, turning the massive charger into an extension of his will, simultaneously. Silas worked with Lena, helping her solder connections and write code, turning her unassuming Honda into a surveillance powerhouse. They installed microcameras in strategic locations around Oak Hill and telephone poles, hidden in drain pipes, disguised as lawn ornaments, all feeding back to a secure server Lena controlled from her car. Finally, Silas established the command structure. When we're out there, we use call signs, he instructed, handing them each a small, encrypted earpiece. Dante, your hammer. Lena, your whisper. I'm hub. All communications go through me. No independent action. We work as a unit, or we fail. Understood. Understood. Hub, they replied in unison, a new sense of purpose binding them together. Their first operation was designed to be small, a test of their new system, Lena, parked on a hill overlooking the highway, listened in as the Iron Vultures rumbled out of their clubhouse, their chatter arrogant and sloppy. "Hub, this is Whisper," she said into her mic. "Vultures are mobile. Heading east on the service road. Standard route." "Copy, Whisper," Silas replied from the garage, where he monitored Lena's camera feeds on a large screen. "Hammer, are you in position?" "Hammer is ready." Dante's voice crackled back. He was parked 2 miles ahead on the Vulture's route, hidden in the shadows of an overpass. "Execute," Silas ordered. Dante didn't engage. He didn't show himself at all. Following Silas's plan, he crept out and, using a pry bar, nudged a large, official-looking road closed ahead, detour sign, turning at 90 degrees. The sign now pointed directly towards a winding, confusing maze of roads in an abandoned industrial park. Minutes later, Lena watched through a long lens camera as Razorthorn led his entire gang off the main road and down the ghost detour. Their confused and angry shouts over the radio were music to her ears. They spent the next hour roaring through a labyrinth of decaying warehouses and dead ends, their engines echoing in the empty night, their arrogance turning to pure frustration. They never saw a soul. They never knew they had been played. Back at the garage, the three of them listened to the Vulture's angry chatter until it faded out of range. A slow grin spread across Dante's face. Lena let out a shaky laugh of relief. It was a small, silent victory, but it was proof. Their shield was forged. Their system worked. The first clash, the success of the Ghost Detour, had an unintended consequence. It poked the hornet's nest. Razorthorn wasn't a man who tolerated inconvenience, let alone mystery. Convinced it was a rival gang or the police trying to be clever, he became more aggressive. His gang's patrols of Oak Hill, more frequent and menacing. But it was Brent Gutter Cobb, Razor's Evereger lieutenant, who decided to take the initiative, humiliated by his leader's growing frustration. Gutter saw a chance to win back favor by delivering what Razor loved most, fear. He would hit Mrs. Carter's house again, and this time, he would leave a mark that couldn't be swept away. One evening, as dusk settled over Oak Hill, Lena's voice came over the comms, sharp and urgent. "Hub, Whisper here. I have a problem. 4 bikes just broke off from the main group. Gutter is leading them. They're heading straight for Evelyn Carter Street." "Copy, Whisper," Silas replied from the garage, his eyes fixed on the monitor, showing the 4 blinking dots of Lena's trackers. "Hammer, what's your position?" "Just finished my patrol route. I'm 5 blocks away," Dante's voice responded, the low rumble of the Charger's engine, a tense undercurrent. "Too far for a direct intercept," Silas calculated aloud. "Whisper, can you run interference?" "Stall them." "On it," Lena said, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness but layered with resolve. This was their first real-time test, not a pre-planned diversion, but a direct, unfolding threat. Gutter and his crew roared down the street, their intentions clear. They carried bats and cans of spray paint. But just as they were about to turn onto Mrs. Carter's block, a flash of dark green shot out of an alley in front of them. Lena's Prelude, its engine whining at high RPMs, skidded to a halt, blocking their path. She didn't look at them. She simply killed the engine, turned on her hazard lights, and popped the hood, feigning a breakdown. The bikers screeched to a halt, cursing, "Get that piece of junk out of the road." Gutter snarled, "DISMOUNTING." Lena ignored him, fiddling with something under the hood. Her stall was buying them precious seconds. "Hub, they're stopped, but they won't be for long," she whispered into her mic. "I see it," Silas said, watching the scene on his monitor. "He's hurting them. Hammer, she's pushing them west, down Sycamore. Do you see the opening?" Dante, now just a block away, saw the strategy unfold on his own navigation screen. Sycamore was a long, narrow one-way street, a perfect trap. "I see it." Hub, moving into position. Gutter, losing patience, kicked the fender of Lena's car. "I said move it." Suddenly, Lena slammed the hood shut, jumped back in, and started the engine. With a squeal of tires, she shot down Sycamore Street. Enraged at being ignored, Gutter and his crew immediately gave chase, their engines screaming. They were taking the bait. They followed the nimble prelude deep into the narrow street, lined on both sides with parked cars and brick warehouses. It was a concrete canyon. Halfway down, Lena's taillights vanished as she swerved sharply into a hidden loading dock. The bikers, caught by surprise, slowed down, confused, looking for their quarry. That's when the world exploded in light and sound. From the far end of the street, to massive, brilliant white eyes, lit up the darkness. An engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very asphalt. Dante's charger, which had entered from the other end and crept forward in silence, was now a terrifying beast blocking the entire street. Its high beams were perfectly aimed to blind the bikers, turning them into panicked silhouettes. They were boxed in. Gutter raised a hand to shield his eyes, his snarling face now a mask of confusion and dawning fear. They were trapped. Then, a new sound echoed through the canyon, amplified and distorted. It was Silas's voice, broadcast from a powerful loudspeaker he'd connected to their comm system. Iron Vultures, the voice boomed, calm and devoid of emotion. You are on the wrong road. Your vehicle diagnostics show multiple engine and electrical faults. I suggest you turn back for immediate repairs. The message was absurd, yet deeply unnerving. It told them they weren't just being watched. They were being analyzed, dissected by an unseen, unknown opponent. It was a display of technical and strategic superiority that completely unnerved them. Scrambling, cursing, and fumbling with their bikes, Gutter and his crew executed clumsy, panicked U-turns, bumping into each other in their haste to escape the way they came. They fled Sycamore Street like rats from a flood. In the loading dock, Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. At the end of the street, Dante cut his engine. The sudden silence, as intimidating as the noise had been, they had done it. They had faced the vultures directly and sent them running without throwing a single punch. But back at the Vultures clubhouse, when a humiliated Gutter reported his failure, Razorthorn listened in silence. The smirk was gone from his face. The arrogance had curdled into something far more dangerous. He picked up a heavy beer stein and slowly, deliberately, crushed it in his bare hand. Ignoring the blood that dripped onto the floor, he had been challenged, he had been outspoken, and now he would bring war. Razor's fury, the humiliation of Gutter's retreat, was a poison that spread quickly through the Iron Vultures clubhouse. Razorthorn wasn't just angry. He felt a deep, personal insult that gnawed at his pride. For years, his power was built on a simple, brutal equation. His gang was the predator, and everyone else was the prey. Now, some unseen force in a neighborhood he despised had flipped that equation on its head. He would not let it stand. He called a meeting, gathering every patched member of the Iron Vultures. They stood before him, a sea of leather and denim, their faces grim. Razor stood on a small stage, a single bare bulb illuminating him from above, casting harsh shadows across his face. For weeks, he began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Somebody in that slum, Oak Hill, has been playing games with us. They think they're clever. They think they're safe behind their little fences and their cheap houses. He paced the stage, his rage a palpable force in the room. The scent Gutter and his men running with parlor tricks and cheap lights. They made us look like fools. A murmur of anger went through the crowd. Tonight, we stop playing games, Razor declared, his voice rising to a roar. Tonight, we teach them a lesson about what happens when you poke the vulture. We are going to ride into that neighborhood, and we are going to burn that Tinkin auto shop to the ground. We will leave a scar on that place so deep it will never heal. We will remind them who owns the streets in this city. A deafening cheer erupted. It was a declaration of war. Their target was no longer just intimidation. It was annihilation. Miles away, in the quiet of her car, parked on a darkened hilltop, Lena flinched as if struck. She had cracked the Vulture's encrypted radio frequency weeks ago, and now, every word of Razor's hateful speech was feeding directly into her earpiece. Hammer. Are you hearing this? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. We hear it, whisper, Silas replied, his voice grim. In the garage, he and Dante listened, the broadcast echoing in the cavernous space. The playful confidence from their last victory evaporated, replaced by the cold, heavy certainty of what was coming. They were 3 people, 3 cars, against a full-blown biker gang bent on destruction. A palpable sense of dread settled over the shop. Dante stared at his charger, the mighty machine suddenly looking small and vulnerable. What do we do? We can't fight all of them. Silas didn't answer immediately. He walked over to his wall of tools, his back to them. For a moment, he looked like an old, tired man. But when he turned around, the fear in his eyes had been replaced by a familiar, hardened resolve. No, he said, we can't fight them, so we have to outthink them, all of them. As they began their frantic preparations, a strange and wonderful thing started to happen in Oak Hill. Word of the Watch's quiet defiance had spread not in words, but in a shared, unspoken understanding. The residents had seen the bikers retreat from Sycamore Street. They had felt the air change. They knew who was responsible. And now, as the sun set and a distant, ominous rumbling began to echo from the highway, they made their choice. They would not hide it, started subtly. An old beat-up, moving van belonging to Mr. Henderson was conveniently parked at the entrance of a wide boulevard, narrowing it to a single lane. Mrs. Gable, who lived on the corner, texted Lena a simple message. My son's friends left their cars on the street tonight. So sorry for the inconvenience. The street was now ACHICANE. Old man Hemlock, a retired firefighter, dragged his industrial-grade sprinklers to the edge of his lawn, aiming them at the asphalt of a sharp corner. Just giving the lawn a late-night drink, he grumbled to a neighbor, who simply nodded in understanding. Porch lights began to flicker on and off in patterns. Codes that Lena, watching on her monitor, quickly deciphered and fed into her tactical map. The community, without a single meeting or organized plan, had become an extension of their network. Oak Hill was forging its own shield. Inside the garage, the final preparations were made. Silas uploaded the new, fluid map of the neighborhoods, defenses to Dante's and Lena's navigation systems. Dante checked his tires and engine, his earlier fear replaced by a cold, focused calm. Lena ran a final diagnostic on her surveillance network, her fingers flying across the keyboard. They were a single unit, their hearts beating in time with the growing rumble outside. The sound was closer now, a terrifying wave of noise washing over the rooftops. It was the sound of dozens of motorcycle engines, a mechanical roar of hate. This was Razor's fury, coming for them. Silas placed his hand on Dante's shoulder. Remember the plan. No ego, just the objective. Dante nodded, his jaw set. Got it, hub, Lena, Silas said, his voice soft but clear over the coms. Lead them on their merry chase. With pleasure, she replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. The battle for Oak Hill was about to begin. The battle for Oak Hill. The Iron Vultures stormed into Oak Hill like a conquering army, their headlights cutting through the darkness, their engines a declaration of dominance. Razorthorn rode at the front, a savage grin on his face, anticipating the sight of burning buildings and fleeing residents. But the streets were unnervingly quiet, unnaturally empty. A sense of unease began to prickle at the back of his neck. This wasn't the terrified welcome he'd expected. Suddenly, a flash of dark green shot out of a side street 2 blocks ahead. It was the Honda Prelude. The car did a perfect 180-degree turn, its headlights flashing twice in a gesture of pure defiance before it sped off into the night. It's them, Gutter yelled. That's the car. Razor's grin returned, wider and more vicious than before. She's ours, he roared. Follow me. The rest of you, head for the garage. He peeled off from the main group, leading a dozen of his best riders, in a furious pursuit of the Prelude. It was the exact mistake Silas had counted on. Razor's arrogance made him want the personal victory. Lena, with ice in her veins, glanced at her rearview mirror. A swarm of headlights like angry hornets on her tail. Hub, the fish has taken the bait, she reported, her voice steady, leading the wolf pack into the maze. The chase was on. Lena wasn't just fleeing, she was guiding. She led the bikers on a wild, high-speed tour through the heart of Oak Hill, a route now transformed into a strategic gauntlet. She took a sharp right, and the bikers followed, only to find the wide street narrowed to a single lane by Mr. Henderson's moving van, forcing them to bunch up and slow down. She swerved onto the next block, the bikers cursing as they struggled to keep pace. As they rounded a sharp corner, Old Man Hemlock's industrial sprinklers erupted, dousing the asphalt in a sheet of water. The lead bike skidded, its rider barely managing to stay upright. The chase became a chaotic scramble on the slick pavement. Every turn was a calculated move. Every street held a new, subtle obstacle laid by the invisible hands of the community. Razor's fury grew with every frustrating twist, his focus narrowing to the single-minded goal of catching the small car that was making a fool of him. Finally, Lena led them towards the edge of the neighborhood, towards the sprawling, dark labyrinth of the Blackwood Avenue scrapyard. She shot through the main gates, which were wide open. Razor and his crew followed without hesitation. The moment the last bike was inside, Lena's voice came over the comms. "They're all in." From his post in the garage, Silas pressed a single key on his keyboard. With a groan of protesting metal, the huge scrapyard gate swung shut. A heavy, magnetic lock, installed by Silas and Lena days earlier, slammed into place with a definitive clang. The hunters were caged. The scrapyard was a maze of rusted metal mountains and narrow canyons of crushed cars. Razor slowed, finally realizing his mistake. His headlights reflected off 1,000 broken surfaces, creating a disorienting house of mirrors. "Spread out! Find her!" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the deadening acoustics of the yard. That's when the second beast awoke. From behind a 10-foot wall of compacted cars, the deep chest-thumping roar of a V8 engine erupted. The 1970 Dodge Charger, its black paint absorbing the darkness, rolled out and blocked the only other exit. Dante sat behind the wheel, his silhouette a formidable presence. Checkmate. The bikers, now truly trapped, circled up, their engines sputtering nervously. Then, a single spotlight clicked on from a crane high above, illuminating the center of the yard. Standing in the circle of light, looking entirely unimposing, in his work coveralls, was Silas Jones. He held a simple walkie-talkie. Razor stared, his face a mask of disbelief. This old man was the ghost in the machine. Jed Thorne, Silas's voice, calm and clear, echoed through the yard from a nearby PA speaker. There was no anger in it, only a quiet disappointment. "You made 3 mistakes." Razor snarled. "I'm going to kill you, old man." "First," Silas continued, ignoring him completely, "you mistook silence for weakness. You saw a quiet neighborhood and thought it was scared. You didn't realize it was just listening." He gestured around the scrapyard. "Second, you underestimated your opponent. You saw a mechanic. You didn't see a strategist. You saw a couple of kids. You didn't see a shield and a scout. You saw their cars. You didn't see their capabilities." Finally, Silas took a step forward, his gaze locking onto Razor's. "But your biggest mistake was your arrogance. You were so focused on the personal victory, on catching that one small car, that you let yourself be led into a cage. You thought this was your hunt, but you were the prey from the moment you entered Oak Hill." The psychological blow was more devastating than any punch could have been. In that moment, Razor saw the truth. He had been systematically dismantled, his brute force rendered useless by superior intelligence. He was a king with no kingdom, a warrior with no war, trapped in a cage of his own making. As if on cue, a swarm of blue and red lights washed over the scrapyard walls, followed by the wail of dozens of sirens. Lena had made the call the second the gates had locked, sending the police a complete, undeniable data package, video footage of the invasion, recordings of Razor's threats, and the current location of the entire trapped gang. The police swarmed the yard, their weapons drawn, finding a bizarrely peaceful scene. A dozen stunned bikers, a black Charger blocking the exit, and a single, calm old man standing in a spotlight. There was no fight left in the Iron Vultures. They were defeated, utterly and completely. Weeks later, a new kind of quiet settled over Oak Hill. It wasn't the silence of fear, but the calm of security. Jones and Sons Auto was bustling, the sounds of work once again a comforting rhythm. Silas, Dante, and Lena were legends, but they didn't act like it. They were just the neighborhood mechanics. One afternoon, they sat on old oil drums, sharing cold sodas and watching the kids play. The roar of Dante's Charger echoed as he pulled it into the bay. But now, the sound was different. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of their watch. They had learned a powerful lesson, one that became the new cornerstone of their community. True strength isn't found in the loudest roar or the hardest fist. It's found in the quiet intelligence of a plan, in the courage to stand together, and in the unwavering belief that a shield, forged in loyalty and strategy, can defeat any sword. Thank you for watching. Stories like these remind us that heroes are often found in the most unexpected places, and that community is our greatest strength. If you believe in the power of the underdog, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story of courage and justice.